So welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your breakfast. I know I did. And I don't know about the rest of you, but with all this talk about healthy aging, I'm starting to feel better about my wrinkles. But there's a lot of serious discussion around healthy aging as well, of course. And so I'm excited to move to our part of the event where we're going to learn about the pioneering health research taking place at Dalhousie. This year, we are featuring an exciting group of Dalhousie researchers who are researching and discovering groundbreaking health outcomes related to frailty and healthy aging. And when it comes to aging, there are many factors that come together to prevent disease, increase longevity, and quality of life.
That's why today we are hearing from three outstanding researchers from Dalhousie's Faculties of Dentistry, Health, and Medicine. These three researchers will present in succession, revealing a comprehensive picture of what the future could hold for you and I as we age. We'll be hearing from Dr. Mary McNally, Assistant Dean of Research and Professor in the Department of Dental Clinical Sciences at Dalhousie. Dr. Olga Theou, Canada Research Chair in Physical Activity, Mobility, and Healthy Aging, and Assistant Professor of Physiotherapy and Geriatric Medicine at Dalhousie.
And Dr. Kenneth Rockwood, who is the Professor of Geriatric Medicine and Neurology at Dalhousie, and the DMRF Catherine Allen Weldon Professor of Alzheimer Research. And you can read their full bios in your event program that's at your table. But now let's begin the show with an introductory video we'd like to share with you. And then we'll hear from Dr. Mary McNally. But first, roll the video.
Imagine a world in which you could live to be 85, 90, 95, but feel like you're 55 or 60 or 65.
So if we imagine a world where they're not frail people, everybody's aging healthy.
So in an ideal world, people who are frail would not be impacted by poor oral health.
And imagine at that time, understanding that the way aging is working, a lot of things are likely going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years.
And we may have to only get to an emergency department because we fell off our bike while going to a social event.
They would have access to professional care, and they would also have access to daily care.
Hi, my name is Kenneth Rockwood. I'm Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation Professor of Alzheimer Research. I'm also a Professor of Geriatric Medicine, both at Dal, and I'm also an active staff physician at the Theou too.
My name is Olga Theou. I'm a Canada researcher in physical activity, mobility, and healthy aging, and an assistant professor with physiotherapy and geriatric medicine.
Hi, my name is Mary McNally, and I'm a professor in the Faculty of Dentistry at Dalhousie. I'm also cross-appointed to the Department of Bioethics in the Faculty of Medicine.
So the goal of this work is not to have everyone live forever, but it looks like it's possible now to think about a world in which people could live till they're about 85 or 90. And people are generally dying healthier than has ever before happened in human history. There are some populations around the world where that happens. And the idea has been to understand what's happening with those people and can we emulate it with something more than exercise and good diet and all these habits that you need to have. And right now it seems in ways that really, really didn't seem likely even 10 years ago. It seems that these things are possible now. And we know it's possible because we're starting to see the trials.
I was extremely interested with aging generally and how everybody ages in different ways. Some people age much faster than others, and you can see it even from kids, how the development is different among different children. We don't think about it as we're getting for adults, we only think about kids, but it's interesting when you see two 80-year-olds that look so different, has such a different lifestyle. So I was interested to find out what makes this, what's the outcome, what can cause this, and what can we do that everybody age successfully and happy, I would say. It's not just a health thing, it's about aging in the way that people choose to age.
I got involved in research involving older adults, primarily from my experience in private practice, where I noticed that older adults, particularly those who were frail or who had early dementia, were really having challenges with professional care as well as daily personal health care. So it brought me to an area of research to really take some broader questions around equality and justice and ethical questions around benefits and harms to try to look at some practical solutions for everyday problems.
Philanthropy allows us the scientists, to do something which is really important. Excellence in science counts upon having the money you put at risk to have an idea that you can pilot and see, is there something really to this?
So it's not only that philanthropists will be able to benefit us as researchers, but they also have, I think, the idea of how they can have an impact on the general public. How can they improve the life, the quality of life and the health of individuals? So by trying to connect how a philanthropist could have an impact on an 80-year-old person now who is aging in the community successfully.
Because oral health sits outside the formal healthcare system, it's a bit of an orphan. And so research that would support us being able to better integrate oral care with general care would be ideal in my world. Philanthropy would go a long way to supporting research that would help that those cross-disciplinary research goals.
Good morning. You might be wondering why there's a baby at a discussion about frailty. I'm sure many of us would never really think about it, but there's so much that we can observe and learn from the mouth. Think about it. One of the first obvious recognitions by a baby is a smile. And what do they respond with? A smile. And so it continues throughout life. On the other hand, we can quickly formulate impressions when we see someone whose smile is not so sweet. In a series of articles for Slate magazine, journalist June Thomas tells her compelling "The Story of My Teeth." Says Thomas, "Many believe that we live in a classless society, but this conviction is tested by the sight of a mouth packed with mangled or missing teeth, its visual code for hillbilly." Says Thomas, "Dentistry is a shirt-tail cousin of the healthcare system. It's the branch of medicine the affluent use most, but in many ways, it is the least familiar, leaving shortcomings and inequities hiding in plain sight." And so, as the dentist on the panel, I want us to think about shortcomings and inequities hiding in plain sight for those experiencing frailty. But first, a little foundation. It's no surprise to any of us that the Canadian population is aging and that Nova Scotia is leading the way. And it's also no surprise that among the most pervasive and problematic expressions of aging is frailty. What we mean by frailty will be detailed by my co-panelists, but simply put, frailty is the concept of increased vulnerability to adverse outcomes among people of the same chronological age. In other words, frailty captures variability in the rate of aging. Despite its widespread prevalence, however, frailty remains largely under-recognized and poorly managed. So it's fitting and fortunate that right here in Nova Scotia, where we have arguably the greatest proportion of frail people in Canada, we also have among the world's most renowned team of experts in frailty research, two of whom you'll meet in a few moments. But before we meet them, I want to talk a little bit more about oral health's connection. By simple virtue of the population bulge, healthcare professionals outside of the geriatric medicine specialty are increasingly treating older adults in our routine practices, and dentistry is no exception. I dare say dentistry provides a particular vantage point for looking at frailty and care needs that are perhaps hiding in plain sight. You may never have thought about this, but effective toothbrushing and flossing is actually very technical. It requires a high level of agility, strength, eyesight, motivation, and so on. For those with advancing frailty, this technical self-care becomes increasingly challenging. So what might this suggest for today's discussion? It suggests that some of the earliest signs of frailty may well be poor oral health, a veritable canary in the coal mine. And although this may seem simple enough, it's not so simple. When conducting research some years ago, we heard a quote from a director of nursing in continuing care that really gave us pause. At this point, I think I want an advance directive to ensure all my teeth come out before I enter a nursing home. At least I know dentures may be easier to get out of my mouth to be cleaned. You will agree that this is a sad commentary, particularly when we've had such amazing advances in oral health over the past half-century. But through our research, the sentiments expressed in this quote make more and more sense. Initially, it wasn't clear whether this nurse was expressing her concern about the consequences of oral disease itself, the difficulty receiving care, or if it's in recognition of the difficulties experienced by care providers and caregivers when providing care for those with advancing frailty. We have come to find that it is all three, hiding in plain sight. And this has been the focus of our research. While we've made great gains in policy and practice, there's much to do. This morning, it's so very exciting to be coming together to cast this truly interdisciplinary lens on frailty. And with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Olga.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning. Where's my screen? Okay, perfect. What I would like to start talking about is how is our population aging. In the figure you can see, the first one, you can see how the structure of the Canadian population was almost 50 years ago. You can see at the bottom the number of children and the top the number of older people. So as expected, 50 years ago, the biggest proportion of our Canadian population was below the age of 20. Nowadays, we see a much bigger number of people between the age of 45 to 65. And based on projections from Statistics Canada, in 20 years from now, we will actually see a much bigger portion of people over the age of 65, whereas the number of children will continue to decline. And to look at some numbers, to give you some context, 50 years ago, the median age in Canada was 25.6 years, and less than 10% of the population was over the age of 65. Nowadays, the median age has grown to almost 41 years, and almost 17%, a little bit more than 17% is over the age of 65. And 50 years from now, the number will grow even more, with 44.6 years of median age, and more than a quarter of the population being over the age of 65. And on the figure, you can see how Nova Scotia compares to Canada. Light blue shows the number of Nova Scotians across the different age groups, and the solid blue line looks at the number of Canadians. So in Nova Scotia, compared to the rest of Canada, we have less children, but we have more people over the age of 60. And this would not have been an issue if most people were aging in this way. We know this might not be a very realistic example, but we have to keep in mind that many people are actually aging healthy. On the other side, we have some people who don't age as well, and this is also quite common in our societies. But we also have the middle stage too, people who might have a little bit of couple health problems, but that are well controlled. And we have to think about aging and frailty as a continuum from people who've been extremely healthy to people who have been severely frail. And aging and frailty does not start after the age of 65. For most of us, it starts, and for most body systems, it starts after the age of 15. So it's not unusual that someone might actually develop frailty from a very early age, and these people might never even made it to the oldest old. This is a complicated figure, but our health and our aging is actually quite complex too. If you pretend that every circle in this figure is another part of your body, and when this circle is white, it means that this body part is in a healthy state. When this part is blue, it means that this part has accumulated some damage. So as people start accumulating health deficits, they become moderate frail, and different parts of their bodies might start accumulating damage. So this is an example of a 65-year-old who has a couple abnormalities in different blood tests, like sodium and glucose. They have a lot of mobility problems, but the rest of their body systems are doing quite fine. 10 years down the road, they will develop severely frailty. And that's when, in addition to the problems they used to have, they will have new problems now. They might have some memory problems, they might have some problem in their knees, they might have trouble with doing a little bit of the housework that they used to do in the past. And for frailty, it's not only the major things that matter. It's not only the things that turn to become diseases. Also minor things like knee pain and things like being tired doing some chores is what also contributes to our frailty level and makes us not function as well as we used to do. To see how common frailty is, among middle-aged people, among females, the prevalence of at least a mild level of frailty is 34%, and among males, it's 28%. Among the older people, more than 1 in 2 older males are actually at least have some mild level of frailty, and among the females, sorry, and almost 1 in 2 males also have an at least mild level of frailty. So frailty is quite common from an early age. It's not just an over 80-year-old problem. So if our Canadian population of people over the age of 45, between 45 and 85, were only 100 people, this is what it would look like. And it's a little bit of underestimating levels of frailty here, but you can see that the majority will actually be non-frail. They would be doing fine. We will have a significant amount of people who have some very mild levels of frailty. We will have some people with mild levels of frailty and some with moderate severe frailty levels. And this is challenging our system as it currently is, and it's not challenging our society and our healthcare system, but also the families and the individuals who are accumulating these health problems. This shows what's happening on average in our population. So even at the age of 45, we have already accumulated some health problems. On average, people would have 2 to 3 problems, and as they grow older, they will continue accumulating. Recovery is possible for most of us, but on average, we will see an accumulation of an increase in frailty level. Let's look at 2 examples. We have person X and person Y. They are both at the age of 65. However, their health is quite different. Person Y has a much higher frailty level than person X. Person X has the same frailty level as a person at the age of 45. Whereas person Y has the frailty level of a person who is 85 years old. So even though these 2 people have said the same chronological age, their frailty, what we can also call the biological age, is quite different. One is 20 years younger, the other is 20 years older than they are. So what we're trying to do with our research and our changes in our healthcare system, in our lifestyle, is not only reduce the number of problems that we start at the age of 45, but also slow the decline that we experience, change this rate of aging that we experience as we're getting older. And why frailty is important? Frail people are more likely to accumulate health problems and diseases. They're more likely to visit the hospitals more often and their doctors. They're more likely to get admitted to a nursing home and die sooner than the non-frail people. This is an example of 2 people who are experiencing the same stressor, let's say a urinary tract infection. The frail person has a small decline in function and quickly recover back to their pre-disease state. A frail person has a much bigger decline in their function, a slower recovery, and they may never go back to their pre-disease state. So this is challenging themselves recovering, but also how the healthcare system is treating these patients. You might be familiar with this map showing the QE2 hospital and how the different disciplines are spread across the hospital. On one side, just to name a few, we have the emergency department, geriatrics, cardiology. On the other side, we have nephrology and infectious diseases. When this system was designed, the median age of the population was around 25 years old, and approximately 7% of the population was only older, over the age of 65. Nowadays, as I said in the beginning, the median age is more than 40, and 70% of the population is over the age of 65. So we need to start considering how we need to start changing our system to match our current population. At that time, the typical patient will have one health problem, one acute problem, and they will show up in the emergency department. Nowadays, the typical patient has multiple interacting medical and social problems, and the system doesn't know what to do with them. So they might have a hard time, the doctors might have a hard time diagnosing the problems because they don't have the typical signs and symptoms anymore. They might have a hard time deciding which unit to admit them. They might stay in the hospital longer, and while staying in the hospital, they might not sleep and eat well. They might not move as much. So by the time they leave the hospital, the pneumonia, for example, that brought them into a hospital might be treated, but the people might not be able to walk anymore. So we need to consider how we can change our system to match the patient and not complain if the patient doesn't match the system we currently have. So we need to change the system to treat the frail people, and by treating the frail people, we then be able to treat better everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Olga. So some of you people know me and know that I come from a long line of fundamentalist evangelical Anglican clergy. That's on my mother's side. And St. Augustine said that you haven't really understood an area until you've learned its hard teachings. So I want to talk a little bit about the hard teachings that come to frailty from the standpoint of how we do the science, how we treat people, and what this means for public policy. So I want to go back to the idea of a frailty index. So that's one of the things that we've done, is been able to quantify the degree to which people are frail, and we did kind of the simplest thing in the world. We counted the number of things that people have wrong with them. We divided by the number of things that there are to count, because the information would come from a health record or an epidemiological database or such. And it turns out that the properties of this thing called the Frailty Index are extremely characteristic around the world and translate into animals as well. And that's been really useful for the field, because if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. The thing I would like this audience to understand first is that it also allows us to quantify the average rate of aging. Aging starts roughly around 15 years old, for technical reasons we can go into, if someone wanted the question. And it goes at the rate of 4.5% per year. Now, many of you financially astute folks will know that the doubling time therefore translates into about every 15 years. So when you're 15 years old and you don't have anything wrong with you, twice that at age 30, you still don't have basically anything wrong. But between 30 and 45, and there's enough white hair in this room, I think we can talk about this experience, people start to notice for the first time that a friend of theirs may actually be really seriously unwell from something other than a car accident. And from 45 to 60, this becomes actually worrisomely common. And from 60 to 75, during that time, it will be more common than not that a cohort of that age will have someone with at least one serious illness. And then if we go from 75 to 90, for most people, that's the last doubling time that they'll have. And that explains why the diseases of old age work as they do. So one of the hard things that we've had to learn from a scientific standpoint with respect to this is that a lot of things we thought were risk factors for heart disease and stroke and dementia, for example, those things that we know to be important, and all of those, for example, have high blood pressure as an important risk factor, they're only a small part of the picture, and you have to look at everything else, that all the other deficits that people accumulate as they age, and those combined are typically more powerful than the ones we've talked about, the traditional risk factors combined. And this has set science, or is setting science right now, in a new era. And we're seeing this starting with Alzheimer's, and one of the key papers that came out that has helped to move the field that way just came out earlier this year from here. And we worked cooperatively with a group in Chicago, and we were able to look at the brains of people who had died, and we were able to look at how frail they were before they died, and we also understood whether they had dementia or not. So when I was a boy, I was taught neuropathology is the gold standard. You want to know if someone would have had dementia when they were alive, go look at the brain. But it turns out that's not true. Some people get dementia with only a very mild degree of neuropathology, and some people, a lot of neuropathology, don't get dementia. What's the difference? The difference is the degree of frailty that they have. So the person who gets dementia with very little wrong was more frail on average than their peers. And the person who resists the neuropathology of dementia was fit. And that's been a hard lesson for the view of Alzheimer's as a single protein abnormality. And there's a great shift going on right now, which will take some time to work its way through. That's a hard lesson for science. We've heard a little bit about the hard lesson for healthcare, which is that we set up a system which has done extremely well, exceedingly well, on further and further subspecialization. I saw John Sapp walk by earlier. He's a cardiac electrophysiologist, not just a cardiologist. He's a guy who specializes in a particular part of a particular set of disorders of the heart. And he's excellent at it. And if you've got the thing that he's got wrong, he's the guy you got to see. And we organize healthcare such that we have a big hospital where there can be people who do that type of really detailed work. That's politically tough, though, because that's violates a little bit the fairness doctrine. Well, how come they're all in Halifax? Well, you need to have a certain critical mass and so on and so on. But the problems of old age come as a package. So most people who show up with most illnesses that you might think belong to a single specialist don't belong to that person because they've got all these other things wrong too. And we've got to start to equip healthcare to care for the people who actually show up, not the ones we've designed care for who only have one thing wrong at a time. And that's a tough sell. And from a public policy standpoint, this is really tough. Now, I'm just a bit player in this whole thing, but there must be some influential person around here who knows someone down at the Department of Health. And for the love of God, could you tell them that we will not get anywhere? None of the plans that we're trying to do to implement better care of older people are going to happen if we train one geriatrician a year. That is not going to work. And yet, that's what I found out yesterday was where we are. So it's really, really important. The hard lesson for us is that our argument is very strong. That doubling time stuff took years to work out, but it turns out to be true everywhere. Our politics are weak, though. There isn't anyone advocating for aging in the same way that people advocate for heart disease and Alzheimer's disease and so on. Thank God people do advocate for Alzheimer's. I wouldn't be able to talk to you about things I know if they hadn't. But I also wouldn't be able to talk to you about the things that I know if I had been tightly tied to a set of performance standards having to do with my research on Alzheimer's. I mean, it was okay, it's been good, but it took a long time. I've had this chair for almost 20 years now, and this was the year when we finally got the breakthrough paper. We've been building up towards this consciously for about 10 years, and a few years prior to that, working around on an idea that turned to this. It's really important that there are organizations like the DMRF that can afford to fund independent scholarship of people who've got kind of weird ideas. It's important, too, that they are held accountable, that they're not just there doing nothing, but it's important that we have those opportunities available. I'm delighted that I follow Olga on this. Olga came to me, I met her when she was doing her PhD, and she was very interested in a postdoc, and I could tell straight away, I mean, I could tell, anyone could tell straight away, this woman is the real thing. And thanks to DMRF, I was able to offer her straight away a postdoc with me. I said, you want, come with us. Prior to that money having been made available, I would have said, you'd like to come work here? Well, okay, there's this form you got to go fill out, and you maybe have a 1 in 5 chance to get postdoctoral funding and so on. And guess what? No one came. But now we have people like that. And within a year, she'd gotten the first of many awards that she got to allow her to finish her postdoctoral training. So seed money, that's how it works. It allows us to get the best people who are around to come and join in the enterprise. This is an inherently multidisciplinary enterprise. You may have noticed faculties of dentistry and medicine and health are here on the stage. We have a very big collaboration with the physicists in the Department of Science, or in the Faculty of Science, to do some work that is groundbreaking in its own way. They have worked out a model right now that gives us instantaneous information on 10 million people across their life course. And we're going to need that level of scholarship and forecasting because something big potentially is happening with respect to aging. And that something big is that for the first time this year in human history, for the first time, we've heard reports of drugs that can treat a fundamental aspect of aging called cellular senescence. The details of it are massively complicated, but the idea is very elegant, that certain cells drive many of the features of aging, not all of it, but many of the features of aging. And this may represent the first step, which would be to treat the diseases of aging for which there's currently no treatment. And one of the first studies that will be done on this is on Alzheimer's. So I'm really glad to have the opportunity to thank the DMRF for this visionary idea that they have of sponsoring scholarship. And I want to be able to say thanks in a really important way, which is that it looks like a lot of the work in which this investment that was kindled by funds from the DMRF. And by the way, if you're interested in return on investment, Dalhousie is ranked #2 in the world in frailty and aging. The place ranked #1, the US Veterans Administration. They have a bigger budget every year than we've ever had here for the entire time. And yet we're able to hold our own. Those days are going to come to an end because technology is going to outstrip all of that. But we can still have a leading edge in this really important work. And I thank the DMRF for that, and I thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Dr. Rockwood, thank you very much. I'm going to get you to stay on the stage, and I'm going to get Dr. McNally and Dr. Theou to come up as well, just for a quick moment, if you don't mind. I just couldn't help but think about the level of passion that we just saw here on the stage this morning with our three speakers. And I wanted to drill down a little bit on that, the passion and where that comes from. Just come a little closer to the center of the stage here. I think I now understand a little bit better why we have toothbrushes at our desk or at our tables here this morning. Dr. McNally, where does your passion come from this? I mean, first of all, did you always like to brush your teeth as a kid?
I noticed you said drill down. That was a little bad pun. But no, actually, I was, like I expressed in the video, I was in private practice in rural Nova Scotia and just saw people coming in who just had no way to be helped. And a lot of it was just the day-to-day stuff, the non-dramatic healthcare stuff. It was just having assistance brushing their teeth if they're dependent, and just the disease that develops without that daily care. Yeah.
I'm going to get Dr. Theou and Dr. Rockwood to chime in here as well. I mean, is there a family connection that got you interested in aging at an early time in your career? Because there's so many different areas of research that you could have gone into, and here you are talking about frailty and healthy aging.
Definitely for me is that if you didn't guess my accent is Greek. So I grew up with my grandma in the house, still lives with my parents at the age of 96 now. So seeing her growing up, at some point I actually lived with 3 of my grandparents in the house. And they had very different aging trajectories, very different aging plans, and what they liked in their life and what they wanted for their aging. So I was always intrigued by this and trying to understand what is driving them, what is more important for them than other things. That's what made me be interested in the beginning, at least, for the research part of aging.
All right, and Dr. Rockwood, you were the last to speak, and couldn't help but feel your passion as well. Is that long been there? What was the genesis for your area, going into this area of research?
Well, I'm from Newfoundland, so we kind of respect older people, or did when I was a boy. But I grew up with my grandparents, so I think that was influential. But for me, the thing was I, by complete accident, was able to work with a man called John Brocklehurst, who at the time was the leading geriatrician of the day. Saskatchewan had brought him out to start the first academic department of geriatric medicine in the country. And I worked with him and a really clever young guy who came out with him as well, called Duncan Robertson. And I was very inspired by the work that they did. I thought, this would be an interesting area to get into.
All right, so I'm just going to go a quick round here before we move along and say, and just ask each of you, stand behind you here as I do this. I want a piece of sage advice from each of you on on frailty and aging in a healthy way. What would you say? I mean, it's obviously a very in-depth topic, but in a minute, what do you want people to walk away with here?
So the way the doubling times work is you want to try and get to 60 with as few things wrong as possible. And up till now, the only ways of doing that are a healthy lifestyle, diet, exercise, those sorts of things. So that's old-fashioned advice, but it's very true.
What about breakfast? We had breakfast here. Most important meal of the day?
So the short version of the story is that it looks like there's inter-individual variability with respect to that. Generally, within North America, we eat too much, and the thing is to have periods every week in which you have about 18 hours in which you don't eat at all, 2 or 3 times a week. Not that hard to do, but it's the evidence is pointing us that way.
All right. Dr. Theou, piece of advice?
So based on my background, which is exercise science actually, it's move more. As long as we can be on our feet, our bodies are designed to move, we need to move. If we move, we're going to be much better as we're getting older.
All right, and Dr. McNally, you're going to tell me to brush my teeth 3 times a day, aren't you?
You stole my line, yeah. Exactly. I mean, all kidding aside, we didn't really get to talk about the impact that poor oral health can have on, especially on frail older adults with socializing. So again, the more we can prevent and stay healthy before we get to that point, the better.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it very much. How about a round of applause? Dr. Rockwood, Dr. McNally, and Dr. Theou. Let me also thank the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation and their donors for supporting this life-changing research. It's clear that this work is worth investing in because of the power to improve our lives. We're all going through this, as it was mentioned earlier this morning.
Yeah, it's, we said at the beginning it's one of our favorite event to MC, and I think I put my finger on it. It's because we learn so much when we come to this event, and just a real nod to the expertise in the room and the fine work that's being done here.